Hello, welcome. In today's video, we will be doing an updated analysis to help you choose the best Sega Saturn emulator, or at least the one that will provide you with the ideal experience. I tested the most popular emulators for this platform, in their versions for Windows, Android, and also in RetroArch cores. And to top it off, I'll recommend the best controller to make this experience even better. The Sega Saturn, with its complex architecture consisting of 2 GPUs, remains a challenge to emulate accurately, even today. Unfortunately, on Windows, practically all emulators for the system have been discontinued. One of the projects that had the most potential, for example, has not been updated since 2022. I'm talking about Yaba Sanshiro 2, which, despite this, continues to receive updates for Android. The good news is that, compared to the last video, we were able to reduce the number of emulators that we do not recommend due to various problems. Now, there's only one project we do not recommend. Let's start by discussing the recommended hardware to play your titles as close as possible to the original 90s experience. Currently, the best joystick to recreate the nostalgia of the past is the 8-bit M30. It is available in versions with a 2.4 GHz receiver, which has low latency, and also in a Bluetooth version. The 2.4 GHz version works on both Windows and Android and the Nintendo Switch, but you need to connect the included receiver. I'll quickly show you what's in the box. We have the M30 controller, which sits in a plastic holder that protects the product, the receiver, if you have the 2.4 GHz version, and a USB-C to USB-A cable to charge the controller. I have used this controller for more than 4 consecutive days, and it still hasn't needed a recharge. According to the manual, the battery is said to last up to 15 hours, and the charging time is approximately 2 hours. Just to give you an idea, on the day I recorded this video, I started using the controller around 1 p.m. and finished capturing only at 2 a.m., and the controller still showed no signs of low battery. Regarding the design of the device, it has a light texture on the surface to improve grip. Unfortunately, I couldn't show this in detail, but the texture covers the entire controller. The buttons are very soft and less noisy than those of the original Sega Saturn, with the L and R buttons slightly lower, similar to those of the Super Nintendo. In addition, it has a select button that you can customize to speed up the game, for example, shortening load times, and it also has a turbo function that can be programmed directly on the controller. If the black model doesn't appeal to you, there's a version similar to the white Sega Saturn controller, with colorful buttons. There is also a model with an Xbox-style button layout that works on Xbox One series, and of course, on PC, and this model is available both wired and wireless. Soon, I will do a complete review of this controller, and as soon as it's ready, I will leave a card here for you to access. If you want to get your M30, buy it directly through the link in the description to support the channel and help us continue bringing you these analyses. Before we start the emulator analysis, I want to thank everyone who sent super chats in the last video. If this content is useful to you, don't forget to give it a like so it reaches even more people. If this is your first time on the channel, consider subscribing to keep up with all the news. Also, remember that we will have a Patreon link in the description, where you can download all these projects for free, along with the video settings I used in the tests to make your experience easier. Since the Saturn has a rich library of 2D games ported from arcades, especially Japanese titles, all emulators were tested with both 2D and 3D games. Now, let's talk about the emulators, starting with the only one I do not recommend, Nova. Currently, it is at version 0.7, but for now, it's only available via Patreon, so I could only test version 0.6. I had a lot of difficulty getting it to work, and this version is not compatible with controllers, only with a keyboard, which makes the experience quite limited and not very intuitive. Moving on to functional emulators, the first is Kronos. This emulator provides a solid experience for 3D Sega Saturn games, and its settings allow for adjustments that improve polygon quality. However, while running the latest version, I noticed that it is ignoring some graphical changes that I tried to apply. This video, for example, shows the emulator running on a medium configuration. Kronos stands out for its quality in 3D graphics and includes functions to enhance shadows and other visual details. It's worth mentioning that Kronos has a resolution issue when running on Windows 11, something I researched and found to be specific to that version of the system. If you are using Windows 10, you are likely to have better results. In 2D games, the experience was mixed. I encountered an image flickering problem with the character in Real Bout Fatal Fury Special, which might be fixable by reducing the cartridge memory amount in the configuration menu. In Marvel vs. Street Fighter, the graphics ran well, but the audio had glitches, which could detract from the experience if your main focus is emulating 2D games. To run Kronos, you need the Sega Saturn BIOS, which is essential for the emulator to function properly. BizHawk. Another emulator worth mentioning is BizHawk, a multi-emulator that also does a decent job with 3D Saturn games. It provides a faithful experience to the original console, reproducing low-resolution graphics without upscaling or smoothing 2D objects. In 2D games, BizHawk excels, with accurate pixel reproduction and good audio quality. Like Kronos, it also requires the console's BIOS to run. Mednafen. Mednafen is also a cross-platform emulator, but it has an important distinction: it does not have a user interface, and you need to install a plugin called Mednafen, available via the link along with the other projects. One issue with Mednafen is the presence of a slight blur during gameplay, which can improve the visual experience for some by softening the pixels but may not appeal to everyone. In 2D games, the blur is also noticeable, so if you want a more arcade-faithful experience, I recommend using another emulator or Final Burn Neo, which runs arcade games without the loading times of CDs. Another downside is that while Mednafen can list the HD files, the Saturn core cannot execute them. This file format is ideal for reducing disk space, saving about 25% of the size of each disk. Moving on to one of the oldest Sega Saturn emulation projects, we have SSF. This emulator provides a basic experience, offering no upscaling for 3D games or enhancements for 2D objects like shadows, which were often smoothed out by the CRT TVs of the time. The performance is decent, but don't expect significant visual advancements. I tested SSF with Castlevania, Symphony of the Night, one of my favorite games, and I noticed sound issues, something serious considering the exceptional soundtrack of the game, and also some frame drops that compromise fluidity. To run this emulator, you also need the Sega Saturn BIOS. Another classic and still relevant project is Yabause. This emulator can emulate 3D games with decent quality, but I noticed the absence of some elements, such as shadows in racing games. Yabause offers one of the best upscaling methods currently available, but I can't call it the holy grail of Saturn emulation for two reasons. First, it doesn't support the CHD format, which is a problem since that is the most common media format today. It also has difficulties with bin and Q files divided into audio tracks, and the playback of these tracks can be out of order. To fix this, you need to use a virtual disk driver and load the file as a complete disk, or resort to images of a single bin or ISO file, which are not easy to find online. Additionally, even using the 8-bit Do controller, Yabause had trouble recognizing the D-pad. I had to convert the M30's D-pad from digital to analog with Xbox 360C for the controller to be fully compatible, something that no other emulator required. In 2D games, I noticed serious issues in some titles. In Castlevania, for example, certain objects were not rendered correctly. And in Real Bout Fatal Fury Special, the emulator made the game practically unplayable, with sprites being displayed incorrectly. Yabause excels in graphics but requires patience for compatible settings and media formats. And of course, it also requires a BIOS to run. Now, for those looking for a more accurate and high-quality emulation experience, similar to what DuckStation did for PlayStation 1, we have Yaba Sanshiro. After testing all these projects once again, I reaffirm my opinion. Yaba Sanshiro is the one that comes closest to a DuckStation for the Saturn. For challenging games to emulate like Road Rash, which mixes speed with 3D environments and real-time scaled 2D elements, Yaba Sanshiro handles it surprisingly well. The emulator encounters almost no barriers when rendering these elements, but some games, like Die Hard Arcade, still have texture issues. This is a known and documented limitation in the Yaba Sanshiro community, and since the project has not been updated since 2022, unfortunately, the problem is likely to remain unless development resumes. However, it still manages to improve the interpolation of objects that were smoothed out on CRT TVs, giving the games a more modern look. In 2D games, heavy titles like Street Fighter Alpha 3 run perfectly, with speeds very close to the original Sega Saturn. The main challenge with Yaba Sanshiro is finding the latest version for download, but I've left the link in the description for convenience. This emulator also requires the Saturn BIOS to function. Conclusion for emulators on Windows. Regarding 3D games, Yaba Sanshiro is undoubtedly the best option, providing good performance in both 3D and 2D games, with simple setup and high-quality results even on modern monitors. Kronos is also a good alternative, especially if you're using Windows 10, as it has compatibility issues on Windows 11, which may be resolved in future updates. For those who enjoy challenges, Yabause can be an interesting option, but be prepared to deal with various settings to achieve satisfactory quality. RetroArch and its cores for Saturn. Finally, regarding RetroArch, navigating its complex menus is a real challenge, especially for newcomers. Each core has different options and customizations, and I had to look for tutorials to find the correct settings. I found that games in CHD format wouldn't initialize, and after some research, I discovered that RetroArch requires the appropriate BIOS installations to run the Saturn cores. With everything set up, I tested each core individually to check the visual quality. Beetle Saturn, although it is considered one of the best cores for RetroArch, I have some reservations. It does not offer upscaling, so the experience is very basic and close to the original Sega Saturn. Despite the good speed and accuracy, the slight blurriness between objects compromises the visual quality. It is recommended for those seeking the most authentic console experience. Core Yabause, unfortunately, the experience is even more limited. It basically reproduces the same as Beetle Saturn, without any improvements, and still has audio issues, such as inconsistent volumes and playback failures of tracks. For these reasons, this core is also not recommended. Kronos is also available in RetroArch, and unlike its standalone version, it responds well to upscaling commands here. The visual quality is impressive, as you can see on the screen, but it has a problem with some 2D objects that are not rendered correctly. Even so, I consider it a good option, and I believe that these 2D glitches may be linked to some setting I overlooked. Finally, Yaba Sanshiro is also available in RetroArch, providing an even more enhanced experience. It offers everything that Kronos provides, but with greater stability and quality, being my recommended choice for those who want to avoid standalone emulators. If set up correctly, Yaba Sanshiro delivers incredible quality, with support for upscaling polygons and 2D objects to resolutions up to 8K, as well as fixes for meshes and 3D objects. It is the only RetroArch core that truly explores the full graphical potential of the Saturn. Conclusion of emulators in RetroArch. For RetroArch, we have 2 good options and 2 regular ones. Beetle Saturn and Yabause deliver only the basics and face some audio and visual issues. Kronos is a solid choice, despite some minor graphical glitches, but it offers a good final result. Yaba Sanshiro, once again, stands out for offering the maximum in visual quality and simplified setup, making it the most recommended for those seeking the best possible performance. Sega Saturn emulators for Android. Now, on Android, we have 2 main projects, Yaba Sanshiro 2 and Saturn.Emu. I tested the paid versions of both and will discuss the functionalities they offer. On Android, I did not test RetroArch due to installation issues on Android 14, as well as the fact that it was not saving control settings on my device. The goal here is again to ensure the best graphical quality, and keep the FPS close to the original console, testing both 2D and 3D games. Saturn.Emu. Saturn.Emu delivers an interesting experience for the Saturn, and although it does not have the same level of customization as the Windows emulators, it seems to apply some treatment to the image, bringing a slightly better look than more basic emulators. In 2D games, it is a reasonable and interesting option for those seeking arcade emulation on Android, since options like MAME are complex and Final Burn Neo has not yet arrived on the platform. Despite Saturn.Emu being paid, its price is relatively affordable. Yaba Sanshiro 2. Finally, we arrive at Yaba Sanshiro 2, available in 2 versions for Android, Free and Pro. The free version requires all games to be copied to the emulators folder, and on some devices, direct access to this folder is restricted, which can be a problem. Additionally, the free version limits some functionalities, but by purchasing the Pro version, you get the definitive option for emulating the Sega Saturn. Not only on Android, but overall, Yaba Sanshiro 2 Pro is currently the best Sega Saturn emulator available. With it, you can run games in both their original version and an enhanced version. And even delivering graphical quality of 1080p for games and 2D objects, the emulator uses only 20% of the GPU of a Snapdragon 8 Gen 1, demonstrating excellent hardware utilization. The Pro version allows access to games directly from USB drives or SD cards, providing storage flexibility and greater convenience for the user. In relation to 2D games, Yaba Sanshiro 2 outperforms Saturn.Emu, delivering superior resolution without the blurred pixels, making it ideal for fans of arcade games like Street Fighter Alpha, The King of Fighters, and titles from the Capcom vs. franchise. Since DuckStation cannot handle all the frames and content of these games, Yaba Sanshiro 2 becomes the best choice for those seeking an authentic arcade experience. Additionally, in Brazil, its price is more accessible than that of Saturn.Emu. On Android, Yaba Sanshiro 2 truly has no competition. With the Pro version, it solidifies itself as the definitive emulator for anyone looking to relive the classics of the Sega Saturn. And that wraps up the video, everyone. Don't forget to leave a like, it took a lot of work to conduct all these tests. Thank you so much for your audience, and see you in the next video.
Let's go.